So I didn't do an intro for this next video while I was still at the shop. Sat down to start editing and realized I never recorded the intro. So here's the intro and some news about the shop. Intro is, this video is brakes on a 2009 Prius, the front ones. The news is we've expanded the offerings of the shop. We're doing all Toyota, Lexus, and Scion vehicles now. Those of you that have been around OTRAM for a while may remember that years ago we did all the Toyota vehicles. And then we got so busy we niched it down to just doing Land Cruisers to try to keep the backlog under control. Over the last couple of months we've been working on expanding the shop. So we're opening it up to all the Toyota vehicles now, hiring more technicians, and going for a bigger repair facility. So yeah, big news. So if you have any Toyota, Lexus, Scion vehicles that need work, beyond just Land Cruisers, we're doing those too now. And beyond that, let's get into the repair video. So we've got our Prius up in the air. We've got the wheel off already. And first step is we got to take the caliper off. So there's some 14mm bolts here with the little rubber cushion and over down here. So we'll loosen those up. Top and bottom. And it helps to loosen both first, because if you do like the bottom one and take it completely out and then try to loosen the top one, sometimes the whole caliper will spin instead, which makes it kind of a pain. And we're going to just wiggle the caliper off, and then I've got a fancy caliper hanger. You can use a coat hanger, a piece of wire or something. You just want to hang it up so that the caliper isn't hanging from the brake hose. And then once that's off, there's two 17mm bolts back here that hold the caliper bracket on. Come on. And they are tight. Really tight. There, we've got those two bolts out. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's pretty good pad thickness left still. And I'm gonna have to get screws to get that out. So let me get bolts to get that out. Actually, let me spin that back so you can see it. And I will show you what I'm talking about in a moment. So sometimes the rotor will just slip off of here. Other times they're kind of stuck. You can either hit it with a hammer if you're putting a new one on, or you can take two 8mm bolts and put them in these threaded holes here. And then use those to pop the rotor off. And you can see the outside of the rotor didn't look too terrible. But the inside of the rotor is completely destroyed. So just taking a quick glance, like in the wheel well, everything looked good. But when we reached around on the inside and felt the inside of the rotor, we could tell something was wrong. So this one's getting new pads and rotors. So once you've got this bracket off, you can just pop the old pads out, and you can see how chewed up the inside pad was. It's got a weird groove to it. And then some of your brake kits will come with new slides. Ours didn't, so I'm going to slide these back in, and they just pop back in there. You want to check them to make sure they're clean and that there's not a lot of rust behind them, because it'll make the pads fit tight. And we're going to take the bolts out here, the slide pins, and you can just kind of work this boot back and then pull the pin out. I'll set that aside and work that boot off and pull the pin out. And I'm going to thoroughly wash these. I'm going to take a bottle brush and clean the grease out of the inside of these bores and clean those pins. And then we're going to re-grease everything when we put it back together so that our caliper slides real nice and we don't get odd pad wear again. So let me clean everything up and I'll bring you back once everything's clean. Okay, so I've got all the caliper slides and brackets cleaned up. So now we're ready to start putting everything back together. First thing you want to do is look at your hub and make sure it's clean and smooth, that there's no ridges, no big rust chunks, anything that's going to keep the rotor from sitting flat. Because if you've got something stuck under there, the rotor's going to sit a little bit crooked and you're going to get brake vibration. So this one's smooth, it's fancy, it's ready to go. So I'm going to take some brake cleaner and put it on a rag and go ahead and wipe down the inside of the rotor to make sure we're clean. And these are factory Toyota rotors, and usually there's not anything on them, but you want to clean them anyway. And then we're going to pop that on there. I'm going to loosely throw a lug nut on there just to hold it in place. And then I've got my caliper slide, and they're marked left and right. I went ahead and cleaned out the bores here. And where did I put my brush? Just gonna show you the brush. I took a bottle brush and just stuck it in here, spun it around, got all the old grease out, rinsed it out with brake clean. And again, I made sure my slides were still in good shape, that there weren't any grooves or chunks in them, that they're sitting flat, so that everything can slide easily. So now we're ready. We're gonna stick this guy on here. Grab our bolts. I'm gonna zip them on with my ratchet wrench real quick before I torque them. And now we can torque them back on. And you'll want to check your individual year just to be sure it's the same. But these are 79 on this one. I just like to give them a few clicks to double check them. There we go. And now we can take the slide pins that we've taken out. And we can get our disc brake caliper grease. And we're just gonna put a thin coating on here. And then stick it back in the bore. And if you kind of twist them a little bit as they go in, they'll pop back into those boots. And you want to make sure they slide freely with no binding. You'll get weird brake wear if they don't slide easily. Go ahead and paint the other one. Stick it in the bottom. And again, make sure it slides freely. And then I'm going to clean the outside of the rotor. Make sure we don't have any greasy fingerprints or anything on there. And I'm going to get my factory pads. You'll see there's a squealer on 2 of your pads. And then those, the squealer goes on the inside. Stick that in. Take one of your pads that doesn't have a squealer on it. Stick it here on the outside. And they should slide easily into their tracks. If not, you've probably got rust behind those shims. So just make sure those slide in easily. If there's any force involved, you've got something wrong. And then I'm gonna take my caliper down. And I'm gonna put my caliper retractor tool in it. And I'm going to push the caliper back into its bore. You can also use a C-clamp, but you risk hurting the banjo bolt that's on here. Before you push your calipers back, you want to check the level of the brake fluid in the master cylinder, because if it's all the way at the top, when you press these back, you're going to spew fluid out the top. So now the caliper's all the way back in its bore. We can slip it over the new pads and the pins, like so. And stick our caliper bolts in here. And we'll torque these to 25. And sometimes you'll get lucky like I just did, and these will just torque up. Sometimes the pins are going to want to spin in the bore instead of tightening up. And there's some wrench flats in here, I believe they're 17 millimeter, that you can slide a wrench in there and hold them while you torque the bolt. And then you just want to make sure that your caliper does indeed slide freely so that it can pinch well. And that's it. I just got to put the other side back together, put the wheel on and torque it, and go for a test drive. I'll bed these in. I'll get going 30, 35 miles an hour and let on the brakes moderately to lay a good layer of pad material down on the rotor evenly. I'll do that a couple of times just to bed them in and make sure the pad's secured, and then we'll be all good to go. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one.